Now, Kerrynne Liddle is someone I've known for 30 years or so, and I wrote a piece 7 or 8 years ago saying the Liberals should put her into federal parliament. Well, they took their time. She was elected just last year, but today, like Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, this first-term Indigenous senator became a frontbencher within her rookie year. Liddle is now Shadow Minister for Child Protection, and I caught up with her today and started out, of course, by congratulating her. Thanks so much for joining us. And first off, congratulations on your elevation to the Shadow Cabinet.
Well, thank you very much for that. And it's terrific to be back on your program, Chris.
Given your portfolio responsibilities, the critical question I want to ask you is whether or not there is a child abuse, including child sexual abuse crisis in the Northern Territory right now, especially in Indigenous communities around Alice Springs.
Well, you only have to look at the statistics. Across Australia, we're talking about 1 in 6 women that report that they've been subject to sexual assault violence, 1 in 16 men. They are pretty significant figures, and that is since these people were 15. So you look at those statistics and then you apply them in the Northern Territory, which we see the figures are much, much worse. It's a bit hard to argue that there are not some serious issues that need to be tackled, despite how challenging these conversations might be.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious to everyone, as I've constantly pointed out with expert guests on this program. But the leading Indigenous child advocacy group, SNAKE, which is headed by Kerrynne Liddle, not a close relative of yours, I understand a relative though. Kerrynne Liddle says that Peter Dutton and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, and by extension yourself, have been exaggerating the problem there in a politically opportunistic way. Is she wrong?
Well, I think when politicians start talking about the numbers in a way that doesn't reflect the actual numbers, I think that's not a good place to be. We have to talk about the statistics, but incredibly what we also have to be talking about in this discussion is we know that the statistics, we know that those figures are identified when people have actually been impacted by something. They've either turned up at the hospital, they've either been reflected in child protection statistics, they either report to police, whatever it might be. We don't want to be relying on those statistics. We know those statistics are terrible. We really need to be focused on all of the underreporting and all of those people who we can prevent from being victims or perpetrators of these actions.
So just to be clear, Peter Dutton and your colleague Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price have not been exaggerating the situation, that they've been drawing attention to what is a growing crisis, and Kerrynne Liddle from SNAKE is wrong?
Well, all I can say is that Peter Dutton was on the ground talking to people about these very issues, and he was simply relaying what he was told. But also, we shouldn't be talking about this in terms of a single situation or a single incident. And I recognise also that Senator Price also lives on the ground in Alice Springs, and she's been raising these issues for some time. I do think we have to be careful that we don't narrow this down to being about who said, she said. The most important people in this conversation are those people who have been exposed to or are at risk of being victims of domestic and family violence.
Absolutely, but Kerrynne Liddle has accused the coalition under Peter Dutton of basically being opportunistic politically on this issue. Surely she can't be right. Surely both sides of this argument can't be right.
Well, let me tell you, this is day one of me in this portfolio, and I'll be drilling right down into what those statistics are really telling us, but also talking to people on the ground about what is happening. You know, often in a room where you get to talk to people directly, you get a very different response about the tragedy that's occurring. I go back to, as I have again, from the evidence that was given by people as part of the Senate inquiry into the removal of those alcohol restrictions in the Northern Territory, and some of those stories about children and about fear of women and children were horrific. And so, you know, they're the stories that I listen to. I hear those voices as well as look at the statistics. And that's what I'll be doing as part of my responsibility in this role.
Kerrynne, when it comes to the Indigenous voice, are you locked in as a no supporter? Is the coalition locked in when it comes to the no side, opposing the Indigenous voice, or could the coalition change its mind with some different wording coming out of the the Parliamentary Select Committee process? For instance, if executive government was taken out of the remit, could the coalition come on board and support the voice?
Well, Chris, there are a few questions that you've asked as part of that. So I'll tackle the first, and that is we made a decision as part of the party room that was really clear. The party supports constitutional recognition, that is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people enshrined in the Constitution, and a legislated local and regional voice. We've been very, very clear about that, and we've also declared support for the referendum process. It will be Australians that decide that. I'm part of a parliamentary process right now which is looking at the effect of the words that are contained within the proposition for what it might look like in the Constitution. And that's a very important part of the process, and we're hearing from witnesses with a range of perspectives, and I think it's important to actually understand what those perspectives are, present them, comment on them, interrogate them, and then present that with the detail to the Australian public, because we don't have a lot of detail that's been asked for to date.
But as you say, you're on that committee along with a couple of other Liberals. Is it not possible that you do enough work in that committee to come up with changes to the wording, proposed wording to the Constitution that would allow the coalition to support the referendum, or is that just not possible?
Well, that's a decision for the party room, not for me. Certainly, as a backbencher yesterday and as a shadow minister today, that's still a decision for the party room. And it's important that this process is actually completed. And because I am part of that process, I'm sitting there listening to the witnesses who've given their time to make their representation. I want to hear all of that before we look at what the final report will look like, and then it is appropriate that we consider what that position is. Whether that changes or not, that's, again, a decision for the party room.
Senator Kerrynne Liddle, once again, congratulations and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.